today I'm going to be doing something really special. I'm going to be taking a helicopter up to Mount Everest. Now, I don't know much about mountaineering, but I do know that you have to have the right supplies, so before we head to the airport I'm going to nip down and get some supplies for our journey up to Mount Everest.
Okay, so I admit I probably wasn't taking this quite as seriously as I should have, particularly with the way this flight ended up going. What I thought would be a funny video to shoot ended up being one of the most tense, scary experiences of my life. The weather here in Kathmandu was incredibly foggy and many flights were cancelled. But after a few hours, the fog cleared and we were driven out to the helicopter ramp where we'd be boarding our ride to the world's tallest mountain. Sadly, these beautiful Mill helicopters have seen better days and we won't be flying on one of those to base camp today. My ride to base camp today was this beautiful Eurocopter AS350, originally delivered to a Swiss company in 2016. Shortly after that it was delivered to Fishtail Air in Nepal, who currently operate the helicopter for trips just like this.
Skids to the rear is a no-go area for the passenger because of the tail rotor is really dangerous. Okay? And if you have to go to the outside, always from the front. Like the oxygen for you guys will be placed over here, just in case if you need it. Okay. And with the black bag, we have the satellite phone in case it's an emergency. Okay. You don't have to operate the doors. There will be assistance all the time. Okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. The aircraft was loaded with fuel which would be offloaded and reloaded several times over the next few hours as we headed towards base camp.
And then they can refuel at the top.
Yeah, when they come down again.
Yeah, am I alright to get in? Can I get in, yeah?
Yes.
Fairly soon we were cleared to start and fired up the engine for our ride up to the mountains. Little did I know at this point that when I landed back here in Kathmandu, I'd be a changed man.
Starting!
The first stop today was to Lukla at 10,000 feet, where we'd drop off some fuel to reduce weight, allowing us to climb further to base camp. The trip to Lukla was stunning as we flew low over some seriously high peaks as the terrain grew higher and the clouds grew lower. Fairly soon the familiar sight of Lukla came into view and we made a sweeping approach into runway 06, the second time I've made this landing and the first in a helicopter. The fuel was unloaded and we had a small top up to allow us to carry on further up into the Himalayas. After a few minutes we lifted off again and headed north into the higher ground. Next stop was the hotel called Everest View Hotel. We'd heard that base camp had been covered in fresh snow overnight and therefore the landing site needed clearing. The plan was to drop myself and another passenger off at the hotel, with the chopper then being light enough to climb further up to base camp to land, clear some snow and then come back to exchange passengers and take me and the other guy up to base camp. We soon approached the Everest View Hotel at 12,700 feet. It's officially recognised as the highest hotel in the world and is popular with trekkers making the trek from Namche to base camp. The chopper dropped me and the other passenger off before heading off to base camp to clear the landing site. From the hotel, we got a good glimpse of where we'd be heading next.
So how cool was that? We are here at the Everest View Hotel, 4,000 metres up in the Himalayas. Everest, we have no view at the moment, it's behind those clouds. Just there, the helicopter's gone up to try and clear a landing site for us at base camp and see if they can do that. But in the meantime, of course, I need to have my supplies. Lovely KFC. It's a bit dry. But something, oh, it tastes amazing. Something very cool about being at 4,000 metres up and eating KFC. Amazing.
Pretty soon there was a drone of a helicopter and our ride arrived back down the mountain from base camp.
Okay, so now heading back to the helicopter. We need to be quick because the weather's closing in and we're going up to base camp now. And it's clear for us to go and land, so we need to be very quick and also very careful I don't slide hurtling down a mountain face here in the Himalayas.
Pretty awesome.
Is it pretty good?
And did I tell you we landed?
Did you land? Awesome. You happy?
Yeah.
Oh, why do they have to park this thing so far away? Okay, here we go. Looking down very low. Woo! Yes, of course.
This next leg took us higher still to Kalapata, the base camp for Mount Everest. This bit would prove to be one of the most incredible aviation experiences of my life. Places I've read about and seen photos of for years were suddenly right outside the window as we climbed towards the foot of Mount Everest. We flew right up the Khumbu Glacier, one of the most hazardous sections of any Everest attempt. Finally, we got a glimpse of Everest peeking out behind Nutsi as we made our approach to the highest place on Earth that I've ever set foot on, Kalapata. It's 18,000 feet above sea level where the air is thin and, with no acclimatisation, spending even 5 minutes outside without oxygen can cause serious altitude sickness. We were able to land and it was made very clear to me that I could get out but had to be back in the helicopter within a couple of minutes. The next part was somewhat of a blur. I'd set the GoPro running before we landed, and my plan was to take some photos outside the helicopter and eat my KFC, but in reality it wasn't quite that simple. I couldn't operate my camera to take a photo. In my dazed state I tried 3 times and ended up just taking photos of the floor. It was like one of those dreams where whatever you do, nothing works, but this wasn't a dream, it was reality.
KFC at Everest Base Camp! Woo! Race of bases! Really cold, I'm right back on board now.
Even eating KFC was hard though at 18,000 feet, I just couldn't swallow it. My body simply wasn't used to this sort of altitude, and I fell back into the helicopter, not even doing my seatbelt up as we lifted off, me slouched across the back seat as if I'd just been plucked from the mountain in some sort of rescue mission. Next thing I know, we're hurtling back down the Khumbu Glacier. Except where we'd flown up under a beautiful clear sky just a few minutes earlier was now filled with low cloud. This didn't look good. The only way back down the mountain was to somehow get through this cloud. We couldn't go over it, we couldn't go round it, and we certainly couldn't go through the middle of it. The pilot started to look concerned too. He hovered low over the glacier and started circling, trying to find a way, any way, through this wall of cloud that by now was surrounding us on all sides. For the first time in my life, I legitimately thought that this could be the end. There were 2 options in my head. Either we'd be forced to land with no supplies and limited oxygen, or we'd end up in the side of the mountain that we were getting so perilously close to. I really feared it could be the latter option, and I started to panic a bit. Suddenly, and miraculously, a hole started to open up just above the ground, and the pilot went for it. It was no more than 50 feet high, and we were almost touching the ground, but miraculously we got through. The look of relief on the pilot's face said it all, and we flew at high speed back to the hotel to pick up the other passengers before hurtling back down to Lukla with the weather closing in fast behind us.
Okay, we have to stay here. The weather's closing in too fast.
I'd never been so pleased to be back in Lukla. The air was thick and filled my lungs with every breath. The sun was warm, and we traded stories about the trip to base camp as we refueled ahead of our flight back to Kathmandu.
Come to the front. The frontier round, yeah? Oh, here then at Lukla again. And Lukla's air never felt so good, man. Wow.
Stay in this upper level here.
Okay. So back at Lukla, they are now going to be refueling the helicopter to take us back to Kathmandu. Wow, what an experience that was. Up to base camp of Everest, 18,000 feet. The air was so thin, it was actually painful. And now you really feel the difference. I mean, when I was here the other day, it felt thin here, but nothing compared to up there, man. That is incredible. Back on board at Lukla. Time to head back to Kathmandu.
Oh, you see that?
Sir, starting motor for Kathmandu. Sir, time will be 40 minutes, level 1 to 5. 1 hopper, sir. Sorry, sir.
As we flew back towards the hustle and bustle of Kathmandu, I had time to reflect on what had just happened. As the pilot chatted and joked again with other pilots on the radio, it was as if it never happened, but in my head, the enormity of what had just happened was only just starting to make sense. You see, I'd been to one of the last frontiers on planet Earth, and one of the highest places on Earth, with no oxygen. I'd seen the Great Peaks, Nuptse, Lhotse, and of course, Everest. I'd been to base camp and felt the effects of the thin air at 18,000 feet. There was such a rush of adrenaline too, I was absolutely buzzing. The atmosphere on the helicopter was great, we were all stoked that we'd been able to set foot at base camp. But, in my head, there was also the reality of how dangerous this can be. Seeing how fast that weather closed in had scared me. The effects of the altitude at 18,000 feet had left me exhausted and in pain. But above all, this was a feeling of immense humility. I'd been able to reach Everest Base Camp and stand at the foot of the holy mountain, the goddess mother of the world. I felt humbled and incredibly lucky. But the fact of the matter was that despite all of this little helicopter had got us through it all, and was about to get us safely back to Kathmandu, where I'd be taking a routine flight on an A320 back home. Less than 24 hours later, I'd be standing in the baggage claim at Manchester Airport, alongside passengers from Alicante, Mallorca, and Belgium. Above anything else, my adventure up the mountain had reminded me of one thing. Aviation really is cool.